Hi everybody, old guy here, and I thought this time I would do something a little different and take a stroll through the ancient past and see about books and reading and what was good back then. Back in the last century, the one that I was born in, about a little over halfway through. Which I realize means that I and the president are both ready for the home. Over the past 65, 70 years of reading, though, I've noticed that books and reading have changed. The way we read and what we read, and of course, what affects that is the zeitgeist, which is more easily discerned by decade rather than looking at an entire era. I mean, let's face it, every decade seems to be very different from each other. It's like we reset the clock every 10 years on January 1st. For example, look at the current decade that we're in, the 2020s. And then compare that to, the 2010s. Good times. Good times. The past is an alien landscape, or however that quote goes, and we cannot help a certain level of revisionism when we go look at it. I mean, here we are, the modern sophisticates, and those poor, benighted ignoramuses of the early 1900s. Don't you feel kind of sorry for them? Except they were better educated than us, and if you don't believe me, go ahead and see if you can pass that 1890s 8th grade final exam that's floating around on the internet. Got a link up in the description if you want to go give it a shot. Novels in the 1900s were far better written than they are today, at least in my opinion. And that's because there was a higher expectation of craft and ability among the public, because everybody read. What else could you do there? Movies were barely coming out, no internet. So you had newspapers and magazines and pamphlets and books, and everybody was familiar with a lot of the classical event conventions, such as thee and thou and Latin and Greek references, because everything was written with that. You'd have these books filled with these things, and they were very florid and very complicated, and you could have a single paragraph that would run 20, 30 pages sometimes. This is stuff that would break today's brains. Now, this list is a swag because there wasn't really a bestseller list that you could go back there and compare, and not a lot of information on who was reading what demographically. So what I based it on is how many books were sold, which may indicate popularity, but not necessarily quality. And my own personal opinion, which that and a quarter will get you 25 pennies. Number 10, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, written by Frank Baum and published in 1900. So what a way to start the decade, with a classic, what we consider classic, but which was cutting edge back then, fantasy novel of witches and wizards and con men. This was the first of what would end up being 13 novels, primarily because the first one was so popular that Baum was inspired to continue the series. The book, of course, is far more detailed and a lot odder than the beloved movie. Number 9, A Room with a View by E.M. Forster, published in 1908. Now, this one was not very popular, but was quite critically acclaimed, and it is the story of a repressed English woman in the Edwardian period, when she goes to spend a summer in the very loose and far more fun atmosphere of Italy, and how she reacts. Number 8. I'm going to group two of these at this place. The Call of the Wild and White Fang by Jack London. Call of the Wild was written in published in 1903, and White Fang in 1906. And these were some of the first examples of anthropomorphic novels that began to appear around this time, and were quite controversial because critics said it was unnatural to apply human thoughts and characteristics to animals. They called Jack London a nature fake. And London, who was kind of a contentious guy, said he was doing quite the opposite, was instead showing animals that react by instinct, not abstract reasoning. And both books, if you've read them, they are just brutal tales of nature red in tooth and claw, and the cruelty of humans. Number 7, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, published in 1905. This is the book that made America sick, with its stomach-turning description of the Chicago meatpacking plants, where one slip and your tuberculosis-ridden body gets ground into tomorrow's prime chuck. This book inspired the creation of the Food and Drug Administration, thank God. Number 6, I'm going to group a couple more. The Scarlet Pimpernel by Baroness Orczy, which was published in 1905, and The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, published in 1909. Swashbuckling Gothic tales, and this was quite the vogue back then. And these two were very, very popular when they came out. They're adventure novels that share a European origin and a European setting, which everybody thought made them sophisticated. Now, The Pimpernel is actually a spy story with a Batman-like hero, while Opera, come on, you know what that's about. Number 5, Kim by Rudyard Kipling, published in 1901. This is probably one of Kipling's best novels, but it gets lost in The Jungle Book and Captains Courageous. Because, we push those these days. But again, it is another swashbuckling story of an Irish boy who's lost in India and how he becomes involved in various intrigues and epic journeys. Number 4, The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton, published in 1905. This is a devastating novel of a society woman's fall from grace as she encounters the barriers and prejudices of the upper class. And this was a very popular novel. Number 3, To Have and to Hold by Mary Johnston, which was published in 1900 and which I am reading right now. And I gotta say, I'm somewhat impressed with it. It's a fairly exciting novel set in 17th century Jamestown about an upper-class royal lady who disguises herself as a servant and boards a ship to Jamestown to escape the amorous intentions of the court favorite Lord Carnal. It's actually pretty good stuff. Number 2, The Little Shepherd of Kingdom Come by John Fox Jr., published in 1903. This is the very first novel to sell more than 1 million copies in the United States and is a favorite of mine that I've talked about all over the place. All I can say about it is if you can ignore the egregious racism, then this is an excellent story. And number 1, The Crossing by Winston Churchill. No, not the Winston Churchill of "We Will Fight on the Beaches" fame, but an American writer who was quite well known until that, English guy showed up. In fact, the two of them finally had to come to an agreement that Lord Churchill would write under the name William Spencer Churchill to avoid confusion with the American Winston Churchill. Worked, didn't it? This book was the best-selling novel in 1904 and is about the settlement of Kentucky. Okay, there they are, a group of little 1900 books if you want to take a trip back in time and see what our elders or our betters were reading. Old guy here. See you later.